The star system was already dying. Blue fire burned across the curve of a broken planet. Pieces of its surface drifted into space like glowing ash. What had once been cities were now silent scars. Debris filled the void, shattered stations, torn satellites, and the remains of ships that never escaped. At the center of it all, a small Allied fleet fought to stay alive. Their ships were damaged, shields flickering, engines overheating. Every warning light was red. Every screen showed the same truth. The enemy armada was closing in, slow and confident, like predators that knew their prey could not run. On the command bridge of the flagship, silence ruled. Not the calm kind. The heavy kind that came when everyone already knew the ending. Admiral Kesh watched the tactical display with empty eyes. One by one, friendly icons vanished as ships were destroyed. No dramatic explosions. Just a sudden absence. A clean erasure. "We have less than 8 minutes," an officer said quietly. "Then they will surround us completely." No one argued. The enemy fleet was massive, layered rows of warships, advanced and untouched by battle. They had come to this system for one reason only, to make an example. The Allied worlds here had refused to surrender. They believed help would come. It hadn't. "Admiral," the communications officer said, hesitating. "There is one option left." Kesh did not turn. "Say it." "The emergency channel." A few officers looked up. Others closed their eyes. That channel was old. Ancient. It predated modern alliances, modern laws, even modern history. Most believed it was symbolic, kept active out of tradition, not hope. Kesh finally turned. "That frequency hasn't been answered in centuries." "Yes, sir," the officer replied. "But it is still active." A bitter laugh came from the side of the bridge. "You mean the human channel?" The word felt strange in the air. Humans. A name from stories. From half-burned records and footnotes no one read anymore. "They vanished," another officer said. "Or wiped themselves out. Depends on which archive you trust." "Or they never existed at all," someone muttered. The enemy fleet advanced another step. Long-range weapons are charged, bright and deadly. Kesh stared at the darkened stars beyond the viewport. "They existed," he said. "The scars they left are still written into our borders." Silence returned. "Open the channel," Kesh ordered. The communications officer swallowed. Fingers moved across the console. The signal was prepared, simple, raw, and desperate. No codes. No speeches. Just coordinates. Just one message. "We are under attack. We cannot survive alone." The signal fired into space, riding an old frequency that cut deeper than normal communications. It vanished into the dark, racing toward nowhere. The timer continued to count down. 5 minutes. The enemy fleet did not stop. Their commander appeared on screen, calm, composed, already victorious. "You have broadcast a myth," the enemy commander said. "There will be no answer." Kesh did not reply. For minutes, a nearby Allied cruiser lost engines and drifted out of formation. Enemy fire erased it in seconds. 3 minutes. "Long-range sensors are clear," the tactical officer reported. No reinforcements. No jumps. Nothing. The bridge felt smaller. Heavier. 2 minutes. The emergency channel remained silent. The enemy fleet powered weapons to full charge. The final strike was coming. Total destruction, clean and complete. Then the sensors screamed. Every alarm activated at once. "What is that?" someone shouted. The tactical display glitched, recalculated, then glitched again. New contacts appeared at the edge of the system. So far out, they should not have been visible. Mass readings spiked off the scale. "That's impossible," the sensor officer said. "Those numbers are wrong." "They are not wrong," another whispered. "They are just too big." The enemy fleet hesitated. Their formation slowed. The space at the system's edge began to bend. Not explode. Not open. Bend. Stars stretched into thin lines. Light twisted as if pulled by an invisible hand. The distortion grew wider, deeper, swallowing the darkness itself. "What kind of weapon is that?" the enemy commander demanded. "No weapon," the sensor officer replied, voice shaking. "It's a jump event. A massive one." "How many ships?" Kesh asked. The officer stared at the screen. I can't tell. The sensors can't separate them." The distortion intensified. A deep, low vibration rolled through every ship in the system, felt even through vacuum, through hull and bone. Then something emerged. A shape. Then another. Then dozens more. Not sleek, not elegant. Heavy, scarred, built like moving fortresses. Their hulls were dark, marked by old damage that had never been repaired, only reinforced. Their size dwarfed anything the galaxy currently fielded. More followed. Hundreds, then thousands. They formed in silence, blocking out the stars, their sheer mass casting the system into shadow. The Allied fleet stared, frozen. The enemy fleet pulled back instinctively. A single transmission cut across all channels, clear, calm, and unmistakably real. "This is humanity." The voice carried no anger, no pride, only certainty. "We received the call." The distortion collapsed behind them, sealing the system shut. And for the first time since the battle began, the enemy fleet understood something was terribly wrong. The moment the human fleet finished forming, the battlefield changed. Not because anyone fired a shot, because no one knew what to do. Across the enemy command ship, voices overlapped in confusion. Tactical officers shouted sensor updates that contradicted each other. Threat assessments failed to load. Fire control systems refused to lock targets, returning error after error. The human ships were there, undeniably real, yet they did not behave like normal fleets. They did not advance. They did not spread out. They did not posture. They simply existed, arranged in a layered wall between the enemy armada and the broken Allied fleet, as if space itself had decided where the line would be drawn. Enemy Commander Vale stared at the display, his confidence cracking for the first time in his career. "Scan them again," he ordered. "Full spectrum. I want weapon profiles, power output, anything." "We already are," a sensor officer replied, panic leaking into his voice. "The readings keep changing." "How?" "Their ships are adjusting, reacting to our scans in real time, like they know what we're looking for." Vale felt a cold weight settle in his chest. Across the system, Admiral Kesh stood motionless, watching the impossible wall of steel and shadow. His fleet, what remained of it, was alive only because those ships had arrived when they did. "They're real," one officer whispered. The stories were real. Kesh said nothing. His eyes were fixed on a single massive vessel near the center of the human formation. It was larger than the others, its hull marked by layers of ancient damage and newer reinforcement. It looked less like a ship and more like a monument that had come to war. The enemy fleet attempted to regroup. Fighters shifted position. Capital ships powered shields higher, preparing for an exchange that everyone felt was coming. But still, the humans did nothing. The silence was worse than gunfire. "Commander," an enemy archivist said carefully, "I am accessing restricted historical records. Emergency clearance." Vale turned sharply. "Now? What?" "Because these ships match descriptions I was told were inaccurate." The archivist brought the files up on the main display. They were old, fragmented. Entire sections were missing or deliberately erased. But what remained was enough. The title alone drew a ripple of unease across the bridge. PRE Council Conflict Era, Humanity. These records were sealed, the archivist continued. Declared unreliable after the restructuring of galactic governance. Vale leaned closer. "Read." The archivist hesitated. "They describe a species from a high-gravity death world. Physically fragile by appearance, but extreme in endurance. Highly aggressive when threatened. Strategically unpredictable." Vale scoffed weakly. "That describes dozens of species." "Yes," the archivist replied. "But none of them did this." Images appeared, ancient battle recordings, degraded and distorted. Fleets clashing in ways modern tacticians would never allow. Human ships ramming larger vessels. Boarding actions in open space. Weapons that ignored accepted limits. Tearing through shields by brute force rather than elegance. These wars nearly collapsed interstellar trade entirely, the archivist said. Humanity fought not to conquer territory, but to end threats completely. Vale's mandibles tightened. Why did no one teach this? Because after the war, the archivist answered, humanity left, and the galaxy chose to forget. Across the system, one of the enemy's forward cruisers fired. It was a reflex shot, nervous, undisciplined. The beam struck the outer edge of the human formation. Nothing exploded. Nothing even moved. The energy dissipated across the hull of a human ship like rain against stone. The human fleet responded instantly, not with a barrage, with a shift. Dozens of ships adjusted position by fractions of a degree, overlapping firing arcs, aligning vectors. It was so smooth it almost looked rehearsed. The Allied fleet felt it too, sensors lighting up as targeting solutions snapped into place around them. "They're protecting us," an Allied officer said softly. On the enemy bridge, alarms howled. "They have firing solutions on every one of our ships," a tactical officer shouted. "Everyone. Are they charging weapons?" Vale demanded. "No," came the terrified reply. "They're already charged." The human flagship transmitted again. "This system is under human protection," the calm voice said. "Power down your weapons and withdraw." Vale slammed a limb against his command throne. "You expect us to surrender to a ghost?" The human reply was immediate. "We expect you to survive." That answer shook the bridge more than any threat. Meanwhile, deep within the human flagship, the atmosphere was different. No shouting, no panic, only controlled movement and quiet voices. Human officers stood at their stations, eyes moving between data streams and tactical projections. The bridge bore signs of long use, scratches on consoles, worn handholds, repairs layered over repairs. This was not a fleet built in peace. "Enemy formations are destabilizing," a human tactical officer reported. Fear response confirmed. A senior commander nodded. "Expected." "What about the Allied fleet?" another asked. "Minimal integrity remaining. Civilian losses are catastrophic." The commander's jaw tightened. "Then we were late." No one argued. A junior officer hesitated before speaking. "Recall protocols confirmed. This call used the old signal. The only one we still monitor." "Of course it did," the commander replied. "They always do, at the very end." On the enemy side, Vale made his decision. "All ships," he barked. "Prepare for a full assault. Overwhelm them with volume. No species survives saturation fire." The enemy armada surged forward, weapons blazing. The human fleet moved at last, but not forward. They advanced sideways, sliding across space in a coordinated motion that shattered the enemy's targeting predictions. As they moved, human ships opened fire, not wildly, not desperately, but with surgical precision. Enemy cruisers vanished, shields collapsing as if they had never existed. Fighters were erased mid-flight. Command vessels lost power without explosions, systems simply shutting down under directed strikes. This was not a battle. It was a lesson. Admiral Kesh watched in stunned silence as the impossible unfolded. His fleet's sensors struggled to keep up, recording more data in seconds than they had gathered in the entire war. "They're not fighting like us," an Allied officer said. "No," Kesh replied. "They're fighting like they remember something we don't." The enemy fleet tried to retreat. The system is sealed. Human ships shifted again, forming a tightening ring. Escape vectors collapsed one by one. Vale stared at the shrinking space on his display. "They were never myths," he whispered. The human flagship transmitted one final message to the enemy fleet. "You chose escalation," the voice said calmly. "We will end it." The human fleet closed in, and far from the battlefield, across the galaxy, dormant sensors and forgotten listening posts began to activate for the first time in centuries. Because humanity had returned, and the galaxy was about to remember why it had once been afraid. The first human volley did not destroy the enemy fleet. It stopped it. Across the system, enemy ships lost formation as if an invisible hand had reached into their ranks and crushed coordination itself. Navigation systems glitched. Command signals overlapped and collapsed. Fleets trained for elegant, regulated warfare suddenly found themselves blind and isolated. And still, humanity did not press the attack. Admiral Kesh watched the battle unfold with growing unease. He had expected fury. He had expected vengeance. What he saw instead was restraint. "They could finish this now," one of his officers said quietly. "Yes," Kesh replied. "And they are choosing not to." The human fleet adjusted again, tightening its control over space. Every possible escape route was sealed, yet no pursuit followed. It was as if humanity wanted the enemy to understand something first. On the enemy command ship, Commander Vale struggled to restore order. "Re-establish the chain of command," he roared. "Reroute all ships through auxiliary relays." "They're not responding," a communications officer cried. "Our signals are being overwritten." "Not jammed, overwritten." Vale stared at the data stream in disbelief. "That should be impossible." "It was," the officer replied. Before them, another archivist stepped forward, voice trembling. Commander, more records unlocked themselves. Systems I didn't even know existed. Vale turned slowly. Explain. They were sealed with authority codes older than the Council. They only activate when certain conditions are met. What conditions? The archivist swallowed. Confirmed human fleet presence. The bridge fell silent. The new files filled the display, clearer than the others, untouched by corruption. These were not myths or fragmented reports. These were warnings. They're labeled post-containment analysis, the archivist said, compiled after the last human war. Vale leaned closer as text scrolled past. Humanity had not vanished because it lost. Humanity had vanished because it won. The files showed star systems burned clean of existential threats. Enemy species erased not out of cruelty, but necessity. The galaxy at that time had been young, chaotic, and dangerous. Humanity had acted as a blunt instrument, absorbing horrors that others could not face. They fought wars no one else survived, the archivist said. Plagues, machine swarms, predators that consumed suns. Each time, humans were the ones sent in last. Vale's voice was low, and afterward, the galaxy blamed them. The files continued. Human methods were called excessive. Their sacrifices were forgotten once peace returned. Councils rewrote history, painting humanity as unstable, dangerous, unnecessary. So humanity withdrew. Not in anger, in silence. They dismantled embassies, abandoned shared space, took their fleets beyond mapped regions, and sealed the routes behind them. They left behind one thing: the emergency channel. A single frequency no one else monitored seriously. Not a call for help. A promise. On the human flagship, the senior commander stood before a projection of the system. His face was lined, his hair streaked with gray. He had been born long after humanity vanished from the galactic stage, but the memory of it lived in training, in doctrine, in blood. Enemy archives are activating, a human intelligence officer reported. They're learning. The commander nodded. They always do. Too late. Another officer spoke. Civilian loss estimates are rising in nearby systems. Refugees attempted to flee before the invasion. Were they intercepted? Yes, came the reply. By us. The commander exhaled slowly. Good. A junior officer hesitated. Permission to ask a question, sir? Granted. Why do we still monitor that channel? The officer asked. After everything. Why answer at all? The commander did not respond immediately. He stared at the stars beyond the viewport, at a galaxy that had forgotten humanity twice now. Because, he said finally, someone has to answer when everyone else pretends not to hear. Back on the battlefield, the human flagship transmitted again, this time not to the enemy fleet, but to the Allied survivors. This is humanity, the voice said. We are assuming command of the battle space. Do not advance. Do not retreat. Hold position. Admiral Kesh felt his hands tremble. He keyed the response channel. This is Admiral Kesh of the Allied Defense Fleet, he said. We believed you were gone. We were, the human voice replied. By choice. Why come back now? Kesh asked. There was a pause, brief, but heavy. Because this time, the human said, someone asked before it was too late. The enemy fleet attempted a coordinated breakout. It failed instantly. Human ships adjusted again, weapons firing in patterns that did not seek destruction, but control. Engines were disabled. Command ships lost power. Entire sections of the enemy fleet drifted helplessly, alive but broken. Vale watched his armada collapse without exploding. They're not killing us, he whispered. No, the archivist said. They're disarming us. Vale clenched his mandibles. Why? The answer came uninvited, broadcast across all channels. Because, the human voice said, this is not a war of extinction. Several enemy officers stared at the display in confusion. That doesn't make sense, one said. We attacked their allies. We burned their worlds. Yes, the human replied calmly. And we are stopping you. Vale slammed his command limb down. Then finish it. The reply was immediate and cold. No, the human said. You will live with it. Across the system, one human ship broke formation. It was old, older than the others. Its hull bore the marks of ancient wars, its armor layered like scars that refused to fade. Identify that vessel, Kesh asked. A human officer answered on the open channel. That ship answered the emergency signal during the last galactic collapse. Kesh felt a chill. And what happened to it? It survived, the human replied. Barely. The ancient ship moved toward the center of the system, positioning itself where the fighting had been fiercest. Its presence was deliberate, symbolic. A reminder. The enemy fleet fell completely silent. Vale stood alone on his bridge, staring at the human formation that surrounded him like a closing fist. We were warned, he said softly, and we chose to forget. The human fleet did not respond. They did not need to, because across the galaxy, long-dormant sensors were waking up. Ancient treaties were being re-examined. Old fears were stirring. Humanity had not returned to conquer. They had returned because the galaxy had once again crossed the line that forced them to act. And now, everyone would learn the truth the archives tried to bury. Humanity never vanished. They were waiting. The enemy fleet was no longer fighting. It was frozen. Across the system, thousands of ships drifted in controlled silence, weapons offline, engines locked, command networks overridden by systems they could not see and did not understand. They were not destroyed. They were held, suspended in a cage made of gravity control, signal dominance, and perfect positioning. Admiral Kesh had fought in 3 wars. He had never seen anything like this. "They're holding an entire armada," one of his officers whispered. Without finishing them, Kesh nodded slowly. "They're not here to prove strength. They're here to draw a line." On the human flagship, the senior commander studied the tactical projection. It showed the system as a living thing. Pressure points highlighted, civilian zones marked in soft blue, enemy assets isolated and boxed in red. "Status," he said. "The enemy fleet was neutralized," a tactical officer replied. "No escape vectors. No active weapons. Estimated compliance failure risk, minimal." "Civilian evacuation?" the commander asked. 70% already secured. Human escort groups are guiding transports through protected corridors." The commander closed his eyes for a brief moment. "Too slow," he said quietly. No one contradicted him. Deep within the human fleet, auxiliary groups detached and moved outward, sleek escort ships paired with massive carriers. They slipped past the frozen enemy armada as if it did not exist, accelerating toward nearby systems where panic had already begun to spread. Because the galaxy had noticed. Far beyond the battlefield, news was traveling faster than official channels could contain it. Merchant vessels rerouted mid-jump. Border patrols powered up defenses they had not tested in generations. Councils convened emergency sessions with shaking hands. A single phrase dominated every transmission. "Humanity has returned." On the enemy command ship, Vale remained standing on the bridge, surrounded by silent officers. "They've cut external communications," one said. "We can only receive." Vale stared at the tactical display, where human ships formed a perfect sphere around his fleet. "They want us to watch," he said. "Whatever comes next, they want us to understand it." As if summoned by his words, a new signal appeared. Not from the human flagship. From the ancient vessel at the center of the formation. Its transmission was raw, unfiltered. No diplomatic layers. No translation smoothing. "This ship is designated Sentinel class," the human voice said. "It predates your current governments." The enemy officers exchanged nervous looks. "This vessel," the voice continued, "was deployed during the last galactic collapse. It held the line while evacuation corridors were established. Images flooded enemy displays. Archival footage unlocked without permission. Worlds consumed by firestorms. Massive non-sentient warforms tearing through fleets. Human ships formed desperate walls around civilian convoys, absorbing impacts until their hulls failed. This ship," the voice said, "lost 78% of its crew in that action." Vale's breath caught. The voice did not rise. It did not accuse. It simply stated facts. "It remains operational," the voice continued, "because humanity does not abandon its dead or its duty." The transmission ended. The enemy bridge was deathly quiet. "They're showing us their scars," an officer whispered. "Why?" Vale understood now. "They're reminding us what happens when the line breaks." Across the system, something changed. Human ships repositioned, not to attack the trapped armada, but to face outward. Their formation widened, thickened, turning away from the enemy and toward the surrounding void. "They're expecting more," Kesh said. "More enemy ships?" an officer asked. "No," Kesh replied slowly. "More consequences." His sensors flared again. Multiple jump signatures appeared, dozens of them, on the system's edge. Not hostile. Refugee fleets. Civilian vessels poured in from nearby sectors, fleeing ahead of advancing enemy remnants that had not made it into the trap. Damaged ships. Overloaded transport. Panic-stricken convoys broadcasting broken distress calls. "They're running straight into a war zone," an Allied officer said. The human response was immediate. Corridors opened in the formation, guided by precise gravimetric adjustments. Human escort ships surged forward, surrounding the refugee vessels, shielding them with overlapping defense fields. Human traffic control channels activated, calm voices guiding terrified civilians through safe routes. "You are under human protection," the voices repeated. "Maintain course. Do not deviate." The refugees obeyed without question. They could feel it. The enemy remnants at the system edge hesitated. Then they fired. A last, desperate barrage, long-range weapons aimed not at the human fleet, but at the fleeing civilians. Admiral Kesh felt his blood run cold. "They're targeting the refugees." Before he could finish the sentence, the human fleet reacted. The ancient Sentinel ship moved. It accelerated directly into the path of the incoming fire. Energy slammed into its hull, more power than most modern ships could survive. Its shields flared, collapsed, then flared again as backup systems engaged. Warning lights exploded across the Sentinel's surface. But it did not stop. Human ships surged to support it, reinforcing the defense grid, adding layers upon layers of protection. The barrage ended. The Sentinel ship remained. Damaged, burning along its outer hull. Still standing. A human transmission followed immediately, broadcast across all channels. "This line will not break," the voice said. The human fleet advanced for the first time, not toward the trapped armada, but toward the attackers at the system's edge. The counterstrike was swift and merciless. Enemy ships vanished under focused fire. Those that attempted to flee were disabled mid-jump, their drives collapsing in controlled failures that left them drifting instead of dead. Within minutes, the refugee corridor was secure. Admiral Kesh exhaled shakily. "They're not just saving us," he said. "They're rebuilding the rules." On the enemy command ship, Vale slumped into his seat. "This isn't about this system," he murmured. "Is it?" "No," the archivist replied softly. "It never was." Another human transmission cut through. "All hostile forces in this sector have been neutralized," the calm voice said. "Humanity will maintain perimeter security." Then the tone changed, subtly, but unmistakably. "To the governments of the galaxy," the voice continued, "this is not an invasion." Vale felt a dread coil in his chest. "This is an intervention." Across the stars, leaders listened in silence. Humanity had drawn its line, not in blood, but in responsibility. And anyone who crossed it would learn what the galaxy once relied on, and then chose to forget. The galaxy watched as humanity took control of the battlefield, and then did something no one expected. They slowed everything down. Across the system, human ships reduced their firing rate, not because the threat was gone, but because chaos was. The fight was no longer about survival. It was about containment. Admiral Kesh felt it through his sensors first. The wild energy spikes faded. Targeting data stabilized. Space itself seemed to breathe again. "They've turned a collapsing war zone into an ordered space," one of his officers said. Kesh nodded. "That's not peace. That's discipline." On the human flagship, the senior commander stood with his hands behind his back, watching the system-wide projection update in real time. Enemy forces were boxed in, their movement options reduced to near zero. Refugee routes were secured. Civilian habitats were shielded behind overlapping defensive layers. Enemy morale collapse confirmed, a human analyst reported. Command cohesion at 12% and falling. "Expected," the commander replied. "They were trained for winning wars, not losing control." A junior officer frowned. "Sir, permission to speak freely?" "Granted." "They're adapting," the officer said. "Not tactically, psychologically. They're realizing we're not fighting the way they were taught war works." The commander allowed himself a thin smile. "Good. That realization saves lives." Across the system, enemy Commander Vale watched his fleet crumble without being destroyed. His ships were intact, his crews alive, and yet he had never felt more defeated. "They're dismantling us piece by piece," he said. "Not our hulls, our assumptions." An officer beside him shook his head. Our doctrine says total force breaks resistance. Vale stared at the human fleet beyond the viewport. Their doctrine breaks certainty. Another alert chimed. Human boarding craft. They were small compared to capital ships, angular and unadorned, accelerating toward disabled enemy vessels with frightening speed. They're boarding us, an officer asked. Why not just finish us? Vale swallowed. Because they want to end the war, not the people. The first boarding action began on a disabled enemy cruiser. Human Marines breached through reinforced hull plating without explosives, using precise thermal cuts and controlled decompression. They moved fast, coordinated, their armor scarred and functional rather than decorative. Enemy crews surrendered almost immediately. The Marines accepted it. Weapons were secured. Medical aid was deployed. No executions. No cruelty. The galaxy's war feeds struggled to process the footage as it spread beyond the system. Commentators fell silent as human soldiers carried wounded enemies to safety under fire. They're helping them, an observer whispered on a distant station. They're controlling the narrative, another replied. On the human flagship, an intelligence officer spoke quietly. External reactions are escalating. Several governments are demanding explanations. The commander nodded. They always do. Let them watch. What about retaliation? Another officer asked. If other enemy fleets respond? The commander's eyes hardened. Then they'll learn what restraint looks like when it ends. The next escalation came without warning. A deep space sensor net, one humanity had activated silently, detected a massive energy buildup in a neighboring system. Not a fleet. A weapon. A Planet Cracker-class device, activated remotely by enemy high command. Its target was not a military base. It was a population center. They're trying to force our hand, the analyst said. If they destroy that world, they think we'll retaliate blindly. The bridge grew cold. Time to impact? The commander asked. 17 minutes. The commander straightened. Launch Intervention Group 7. Full priority. Human ships broke formation instantly, not in panic, but purpose. A strike group peeled away, jumping not toward the enemy fleet, but toward the distant system where the weapon charged. Admiral Kesh watched the movement with awe. They're splitting their force in the middle of a war. They've already won this one, an allied officer replied. They're stopping the next. The trapped enemy fleet sensed it too. They're leaving, an enemy officer shouted. This is our chance. Bill did not move. No, this is their test. In the distant system, the planet Cracker activated fully, its core igniting with catastrophic energy. The world below had no defenses left. Evacuation was incomplete. Human ships arrived less than 5 minutes later. They did not fire on the weapon. They wrapped around it. Gravitational anchors deployed, locking the device in place. Energy siphons engaged, draining its core output into containment fields that screamed under the strain. Human ships burned. Hull plating warped. Systems overloaded. But the weapon's charge began to fall. They're absorbing it, a human officer said through clenched teeth. All of it. Hold. The commander ordered calmly. No matter what. The weapon collapsed in on itself, detonating harmlessly into contained space. The planet lived. Several human ships did not. Back in the main system, Admiral Kesh felt the shift as news arrived. They sacrificed ships to save a world they don't even control, he whispered. Vale received the same update. His mandibles trembled. This war was supposed to be an example, he said hoarsely. Instead, it made a confession. Humanity returned to the main system moments later, their formation tighter, darker, more focused. The restraint was gone. Human weapons powered up fully for the first time. A single transmission cut through every channel. This escalation is concluded, the human voice said. Further resistance will result in permanent neutralization. The enemy fleet did not hesitate this time. They surrendered. Across the system, weapons powered down. Engines cut. Command codes were transmitted openly. The war was over. But the lesson had only begun. Admiral Kesh looked out at the human fleet, at ships scarred by battles no one remembered, at soldiers who fought wars so others wouldn't have to. They fight like guardians, he said quietly. No, a human officer replied over the open channel. We fight like the last ones willing to stand. Far beyond the battlefield, the galaxy listened. And for the first time in centuries, it understood something it had forgotten how to name. There are wars you win with force. In wars, you survive only because someone else refuses to let the line break. The surrender spread through the enemy fleet like a slow exhale. Weapons powered down. Engines went silent. Command codes unlocked. Ships that had once filled the system with threats now drifted helplessly, surrounded by human vessels that did not rush in to punish them. For many in the galaxy, that should have been the end. For humanity, it never was. On the human flagship, the senior commander did not relax. He studied the long-range feeds instead, the parts of the war no one else was watching anymore. "Status of Intervention Group 7? He asked. The answer came after a pause that felt too long. 3 ships lost, the officer said. Confirmed destroyed during containment of the planet Cracker. 2 more critically damaged. The bridge went quiet. Those ships had not been small escorts. They were line vessels, built to hold positions no one else could. Each carried thousands of crew. The commander closed his eyes briefly. "Survivors?" he asked. "Rescue operations are ongoing," the officer replied. But many compartments were vaporized. No one spoke. Humanity had arrived as legends, as an unstoppable force. But legends bled all the same. Across the system, Admiral Kesh received the casualty update through an open channel. His throat tightened. "They saved an entire world," he said quietly to his officers, "and paid for it in blood." "They didn't have to," someone replied. Kesh shook his head. "They always do." The enemy commander, Vale, received the same report. He stared at the data, mandibles trembling. "They lost ships because of us," he whispered. "And they still didn't retaliate." An officer beside him spoke carefully. "Commander, perhaps we should request terms immediately." Vale looked up. "We already surrendered." "Yes," the officer replied. "But surrender does not mean forgiveness." Before Vale could answer, a new alert flared across every display. Multiple unauthorized jump signatures. Fast. Unscheduled. Human sensors caught them first. An unknown fleet entering the sector. A human analyst reported. Configuration does not match enemy remnants. The commander leaned forward. "Identify." The answer arrived with cold clarity. Independent warlords. Opportunists. They were waiting for the outcome. The galaxy's scavengers had arrived. Admiral Kesh felt a dread surge through him. They're here to strike while everyone's exposed. Or worse, an officer said. To hit civilians before anyone can respond. Human ships moved instantly. The formation tightened again, shifting priorities. Escort groups repositioned around refugee corridors. Damaged human vessels were pulled inward, shielded by intact ships. This is the moment, Kesh realized. This is where everyone else would hesitate. The warlord fleet did not. They launched without warning. Not in the human fleet. At the civilians. Long-range missiles streaked toward evacuation routes. Time to slip through gaps before interception. The human commander did not shout. "Deploy AegisNet," he said calmly. Human ships separated into layers, overlapping defense grids forming a living wall. Interceptors launched in waves, colliding with incoming fire far from civilian paths. But there were too many. Some missiles broke through. One was headed straight for a packed transport. Engines failing, shields barely holding. Admiral Kesh watched the trajectory line turn red. "They won't make it," he said. A human ship moved without orders. The ancient Sentinel. Its hull was already scarred from earlier impacts. Its systems were old, reinforced beyond original design limits. It accelerated directly into the missile's path. "No," a human officer began. The Sentinel took the hit. The explosion tore across its bow, ripping away armor, exposing internal structure to open space. The shockwave rattled nearby ships. But the missile detonated harmlessly. The transport survived. Inside the Sentinel, emergency lights flared. Bulkheads are sealed automatically. Fires erupted along exposed corridors. Damage reports flooded in. Hull breach on multiple decks. Life support failing in forward sections. Crew losses confirmed. The Sentinel slowed, but did not stop. The human commander's jaw tightened. "Signal the Sentinel. Order them to withdraw." The response came, distorted by damage. "Negative," the Sentinel's captain replied. "We can still maneuver." "You've done enough," the commander said firmly. A pause. Then the captain spoke again, voice steady despite the chaos around him. "This ship was built to hold the line," he said. "We are still holding it." The warlord fleet pressed harder, sensing weakness. Human restraint vanished. Human weapons fired at full capacity. Warlord ships disintegrated under focused strikes. Those that tried to flee were cut off, their drives disabled, their weapons silenced. The attack collapsed in minutes. The price remained. On the Sentinel, the damage worsened. Core containment alarms wailed. Power fluctuations rippled through the ship. Reactor stability failing, an engineer reported. We can't hold this much longer. The captain looked around the bridge, at a crew who knew exactly what that meant. Evacuation pods? He asked. Destroyed in the initial hit, came the reply. Silence settled. The captain opened a channel to the human flagship. Command, he said. This is Sentinel. Our core is unstable. The commander closed his eyes. Understood. We can vent the core, the captain continued. Contain failure. But we won't clear the blast radius in time. The commander said nothing. Permission to proceed, the captain said. The pause stretched. Then the commander answered, voice low. Granted. Across the system, Admiral Kesh saw the Sentinel's energy signature spike. What are they doing? One of his officers asked. Kesh already knew. They're choosing where to fall, he said softly. The Sentinel maneuvered one last time, placing itself between the refugee corridor and the wreckage field where the blast would spread. Its reactor vented. Light flared brighter than a star. The shockwave rippled outward, contained, controlled, dissipated by human counterfields. When the light faded, the Sentinel was gone. The corridor remained intact. Civilians lived. On the human flagship, no one cheered. No one spoke. The commander stood in silence as the casualty report was finalized. Another human ship was lost. Another crew is gone. Across the galaxy, the feeds showed the explosion again and again. Commentators fell silent. Even the most hardened war analysts had no words. Admiral Kesh removed his command insignia and set it on the console. They didn't just save us, he said quietly. They paid for us. Vale watched the same footage from his disabled bridge. His surrender suddenly felt meaningless. We thought war was about power, he whispered. They made it about responsibility. A final human transmission went out, short, controlled, and heavy with meaning. Civilian evacuation complete, the voice said. Threats neutralized. There was no celebration, only resolve. Humanity had returned to stop a war. But once again, they had done what they always did. They stood where others could not. They paid what others would not. And they carried the weight of survival, alone, if they had to. The battlefield did not erupt after the Sentinel's loss. It went quiet. Not the empty quiet of fear, but the heavy, waiting silence that follows a decision made too clearly to undo. Across the system, the remaining human ships tightened formation around the refugee corridors and disabled fleets. The place where the Sentinel had fallen was marked by drifting fragments and fading radiation, contained and controlled. No debris reached civilian lanes. No shockwave escaped its boundary. Humanity had contained even its own death. On the human flagship, the commander remained standing, eyes fixed on the tactical display. The symbol representing the Sentinel was gone. In its place was a thin white outline, a marker of loss, not erased, not hidden. Confirm, he said quietly. The Sentinel-class vessel was destroyed, the operations officer replied. All hands lost. The words landed, but they did not slow the bridge. Because this was not the first time. Proceed, the commander said. Across the system, human ships began to move again, not aggressively, not defensively, but deliberately. Boarding craft launched in organized waves, not toward civilians, but toward the surrendered enemy fleet. Admiral Kesh watched the shift with a strange unease. They're not done, he said. No, an officer replied. They're deciding what comes next. On the enemy command ship, Vale stood alone. His bridge crew had been escorted away earlier, disarmed, treated, and transferred to secure holding ships. Not prisons. Medical ships. Stabilization platforms. Vale remained because he had been allowed to. That fact frightened him more than any threat. A human boarding team entered the bridge. They did not shout. They did not rush. They moved with practiced calm, weapons lowered but ready. Their leader removed their helmet. Humans. Older than expected. Eyes tired, not angry. You are Commander Vale, the human said. I am, Vale replied, forcing himself to stand straight. You surrendered your fleet. Yes. You complied fully. Yes. The human nodded once. Then you will not be harmed. Vale swallowed. What happens to us? The human considered him for a moment. That depends on what you do next. Vale frowned. I have no fleet. No leverage. No, the human agreed. But you have a memory. Across the system, similar scenes played out. Enemy commanders were detained, but not executed. Crews were disarmed, but not punished. Medical aid was given freely, even to those who had fired moments before. The galaxy's war feeds struggled to keep up. This is unprecedented, analysts whispered. They're not conquering. They're not occupying. They're dismantling the war, another replied. On the human flagship, reports flowed in. Enemy forces secured. Warlord remains neutralized. Civilian zones are stable. The commander listened, then turned to the intelligence chief. Broadcast the archive, he said. The chief raised an eyebrow. All of it? Yes. Moments later, every major communication channel across the galaxy activated simultaneously. Not with propaganda, not with demands, with history. Images poured into public view, raw, unfiltered records from wars long buried. Not rewritten, not softened. Human fleets holding collapsing fronts while others evacuated. Human soldiers fighting biological horrors no one else could survive. Human worlds are burning because they stood between the galaxy and extinction. The cost, the sacrifice, the abandonment. The broadcast ended with a single message. Humanity did not leave because it failed, the calm voice said. We left because the galaxy forgot what survival costs. On a distant council world, leaders watched in silence. Some recognized the images. Some pretended not to. Back in the broken system, the human flagship opened a channel, this time to the Allied fleets. Admiral Kesh answered immediately. This is Admiral Kesh, he said. We owe you more than words. The human commander met his gaze through the screen. We didn't come for gratitude, he said. We came because this line was crossed. Kesh hesitated. What happens now? The commander did not answer immediately. Instead, he brought up a system-wide projection. This region, he said, highlighting sectors once considered stable, will be placed under temporary human protection. Kesh stiffened. Occupation? No, the commander replied. Oversight. And the enemy? Kesh asked. They will be disarmed, the human said. Their war-making capacity was dismantled. Their leadership was held accountable. Vale, listening from his holding ship, felt a chill. Accountable how? The answer came not as a threat, but a condition. They will testify, the human voice said across the open channels. They will document. They will ensure this history is not erased again. Vale understood then. This was not punishment. This was judgment. The human fleet repositioned, escorting surrendered ships toward designated zones. Not camps. Not prisons. Observation fields. Neutral zones where war could not continue. The galaxy watched, stunned. They could have wiped them out. Voices whispered across countless worlds. But they didn't. Why? The answer came quietly, from a human officer interviewed live aboard a carrier. Because extermination ends enemies, she said. It doesn't end wars. On the human flagship, the commander finally sat. The cost of command weighed heavier now than during the fighting. An aide approached. Sir, the crews are asking. Asking what? The commander said without looking up. If this means we're staying. The commander closed his eyes. For now, he said. Yes. And after? He opened his eyes, gaze steady. That depends on whether the galaxy remembers. In the refugee corridors, civilians watched human ships glide past, scarred, silent, protective. Children pressed faces to viewports. The elders bowed without knowing why. They felt it. Not fear. Safety. Admiral Kesh stood on his bridge long after the fighting ended, watching the stars rearrange themselves under human control. They didn't take power, he said softly. They took responsibility. An allied officer nodded. And now the galaxy has to decide what to do with that. In a distant world, councils argued. On another, fleets powered down. On another, warlords fled into hiding. And everywhere, one truth spread faster than any fleet ever could. Humanity had returned. Not as conquerors, not as rulers, but as judges who remembered the cost of mercy and the price of forgetting. The galaxy held its breath, because judgment without hatred was far more terrifying than vengeance. The war did not end with explosions. It ended with signatures. Across hundreds of systems, weapons powered down in unison. Fleets that had once patrolled borders with arrogance now held positions under human oversight. Supply routes reopened. Refugee convoys completed their journeys without fear of ambush. For the first time in generations, the galaxy was quiet. Not because it was safe, but because it was thinking. On the human flagship, the commander stood before a projection that spanned half the known stars. Every sector under temporary human protection glowed softly. Every former conflict zone pulsed with live data. Status, he said. Compliance remains high. An officer replied. No organized resistance. Several governments have formally requested human mediation. Another officer added. Councils are reopening archived treaties. Some are requesting access to our historical records voluntarily. The commander nodded once. That's new, he said. In the observation zone, Commander Vale stood before a recording console. He had been given unrestricted access. No guards, no restraints. Just a choice. Record the truth. He began again, voice steady despite the weight pressing on his chest. We believed power meant control, Vale said into the recorder. We believed fear kept the galaxy stable. We were wrong. He paused, mandibles tightening. When humanity returned, they did not destroy us. They showed us what we had become. The recording would be sent to every major archive. Not edited. Not softened. Permanent. Across the galaxy, similar recordings were being made by surrendered leaders, warlords, admirals. Humanity had not demanded confessions. They had demanded memory. Admiral Kesh stood aboard his repaired flagship, watching human engineers work alongside Allied crews. They spoke little. They did not boast. They fixed what was broken and moved on. You're really staying, Kesh said quietly to a human officer beside him. For now, she replied. Until the structure holds on its own. And if it doesn't? She met his gaze. Then we stay longer. Kesh exhaled slowly. You could rule all of this. The human officer shook her head. We tried ruling once. It doesn't work. Then what do you call this? Kesh asked, gesturing to the stars. She thought for a moment. Guardianship, she said, with an expiration date. In distant systems, children watched human ships pass overhead and did not hide. Merchants reopened routes once considered dead. Old listening posts, forgotten relics of past wars, were reactivated not by force, but by agreement. The galaxy was relearning cooperation. Slowly, painfully. On the human flagship, the commander received a priority transmission. Origin unknown, the officer said. But the encryption is old. The commander's eyes sharpened. Open it. The message resolved into a simple data packet. Coordinates, a timestamp, and a single line of text. Emergency channel, active. The bridge went still. That channel isn't supposed to be used anymore, an aide said. No, the commander replied. It's supposed to be remembered. He studied the coordinates. They lay far beyond the protected zones, near a region marked in ancient records with a warning few had taken seriously. A place where something old had begun to stir. The commander straightened. Recall fleet elements, he ordered calmly. Prepare a response group. The aide hesitated. Sir, we just stabilized the galaxy. The commander's voice was steady. That's why we answer. Across the galaxy, the movement did not go unnoticed. Human ships adjusted course. Sensors shifted. Long-range arrays powered up. Fear rippled briefly, then settled. Because now, everyone understood what those movements meant. Help was coming. On a small refugee world saved only days earlier, a child watched the sky as human ships passed overhead. She turned to her parents. Why do they help us? She asked. The answer came after a long pause. Because once, the parent said softly, no one helped them. The child frowned. Will they leave again? The parent looked up at the stars, at ships scarred by battles older than memory, moving with quiet purpose. I don't think so, they said. Not like before. In the council chambers of the galaxy, debates raged. Some demanded human withdrawal. Others demanded alliance. Some feared dependence. But none denied the truth. Without humanity, the galaxy would have burned. On the human flagship, the commander recorded a message, short, unadorned, and sent across all protected systems. Humanity does not seek control, his voice said. We seek continuity. He paused. We will not rule you. We will not save you forever. But as long as this channel exists, as long as someone remembers how to ask, we will answer. The message ended. No anthem followed. No declaration of empire. Just presence. The fleet moved. As the stars shifted and jump corridors opened, The galaxy felt something unfamiliar settle in its core. Not fear, not worship, responsibility. Because now the truth was impossible to deny. Humanity was not a legend, not a myth, not a weapon to be unleashed and forgotten. They were the ones who came when no one else would. The ones who paid the price others avoided. And this time, the galaxy remembered.